9.
So picture this. You're sitting in a restaurant right on the coast, just, looking out the window.
Hopefully having something good, like a nice seafood dinner.
Right, exactly. Enjoying the great seafood dinner. The sun is just starting to set. And then suddenly the sky flashes this blinding white.
Just out of nowhere.
Out of completely nowhere. And you don't know it yet, but in less time than it takes to, ask for the check. The foundational systems of the global economy, the climate, the entire food chain, they've all just been irreparably broken.
Yeah, it's pretty much the ultimate nightmare scenario.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet, if we look at the historical data, it's a reality our planet has actually already endured. Plus, and this is where it gets really interesting, it's an event that certain ancient texts insist is scheduled to happen again.
And that brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at two really intense, seemingly totally different sources that tackle this exact apocalyptic scenario.
Right, two very distinct perspectives.
Yeah. So first we have the U.S. National Science Foundation's geological data on the Chicxulub asteroid. And that is the 10-kilometer-wide rock that ended the reign of the dinosaurs about 66 million years ago.
And alongside that scientific data,
Right.
we have a detailed theological analysis of the second trumpet from the biblical book of Revelation,
Right.
which is a text that describes a scenario where something like a mountain-sized fireball is thrown into the ocean, which triggers this cascading global catastrophe.
Our goal is just to map out the sheer physical, socio-political, and ecological destruction detailed in both of these sources. We're putting the mechanical, geological reality of Chicxulub side by side with the prophetic judgment of the second trumpet, just to see how they align.
And it really becomes an exercise in scale, I think, because to truly comprehend the ocean strike described in Revelation, we have to grasp the staggering physics of a mountain-sized rock hitting the Earth.
Which is hard to even picture.
It really is. And to do that, we have to look at the geological record.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's visualize the numbers from the NSF data because they are, frankly, almost too large for the human brain to process.
They sound made up, honestly.
I really do. So the Chicxulub asteroid was roughly 10 kilometers across.
That's about 6.2 miles of solid rock.
Right. And it's traveling at an estimated 20 kilometers per second. To put that in perspective, that is 58 times the speed of sound.
Wow.
Yeah. So at that speed, the atmosphere doesn't just, politely move out of the way.
No, it forcefully compresses.
Right. It compresses and superheats in a fraction of a second.
And the angle of impact is also really crucial here. It didn't just graze the atmosphere. It struck at a steep angle, somewhere between 45 and 60 degrees.
Straight into the crust.
Exactly. And the energy released by that sudden deceleration is estimated at 100 teratons of TNT.
Which is just an absurd number.
Yeah, since teratons are basically imaginary numbers to most of us, think of it this way. The blast was 4.5 billion times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
4.5 billion Hiroshimas in a single second.
Yep.
That is just, the impact blasted a cavity into the Earth's crust 100 kilometers wide and 30 kilometers deep.
Just instantly excavating the Earth.
Right. And it shot a 25 trillion metric ton plume of molten material straight up into the atmosphere. The NSF notes some of this ejected material was literally hotter than the surface of the sun.
Which is wild. But what's fascinating here is that physical reality mirrors the theological source remarkably well.
Oh, totally.
The second trumpet text describes something like a great mountain burning with fire being thrown into the sea.
Which sounds exactly like an asteroid.
Exactly. The source actually quotes Bill McGuire, a professor of geophysical hazards, who points out that the dinosaur-killing asteroid fits this ancient description perfectly.
A 10-kilometer rock crashing down, dragging a fireball hotter than the sun behind it.
Yeah, just tearing the Earth's crust open.
I am stuck on one specific detail here, though, because the biblical text specifically says this mountain hits the sea. But the NSF data notes Chicxulub hit the Yucatan Peninsula.
Right, which was a shallow sea at the time.
Yeah, but it still involved a massive amount of continental bedrock. So according to the sources, how does a deep ocean strike change the initial mechanics of the catastrophe?
Well, it changes the weapon entirely, because 70% of the Earth's surface is water, right? So space debris is statistically far more likely to hit the ocean.
Which makes sense.
And the theological source highlights this. Hitting the deep ocean means you aren't immediately vaporizing as much continental bedrock.
Okay, so maybe less initial dust.
Right, it might slightly reduce that initial dust cloud. But you are trading that for Honestly, the most devastating fluid dynamics imaginable.
Oh, because of the water.
Exactly. Think of a deep ocean impact.
Yeah.
Less like dropping a rock into a pond, and more like a massive piston slamming into a hydraulic cylinder. Water cannot be compressed.
So all that kinetic energy just has to go somewhere.
It transfers straight outward.
Wow. So we basically go from a fireball to a massive wall of water. The sheer volume of destruction shifts mediums entirely.
Yeah, the ocean essentially becomes a delivery mechanism for the kinetic energy of the asteroid.
And the NSF data paints a horrifying picture of what that delivery mechanism looks like. Immediately following the Chicxulub impact, there was a 1.5-kilometer high tsunami.
Just let that sink in for a second.
A wave roughly a mile high. I can't even picture a wave that big.
And that was just the initial displacement splash.
Right. And then as the crust shattered, it spawned magnitude 9 to 11 earthquakes all over the globe.
Which is just, apocalyptic on its own.
Yeah, and those triggered secondary tsunamis ranging from 50 to 150 meters high.
And those ensuing waves displaced 48,000 cubic miles of sediment across the Gulf of Mexico alone.
48,000 cubic miles.
Yeah, coastlines weren't just flooded. They were completely buried under hundreds of feet of churning debris.
And this maps directly onto the prophecy of the second trumpet, which states that 1/3 of the ships are destroyed.
Right. The theological analysis attributes this massive maritime loss to those exact mechanisms. Gigantic tsunamis, battering ports, shredding coastlines, and just swallowing sea vessels whole.
Not to mention the wind.
Oh, yeah. The atmosphere wouldn't just be windy.
Yeah.
The superheated air over the impact zone would generate hypercanes.
Hypercanes. That sounds terrifying.
They are. They're theoretical storms, 5 times more powerful than the strongest Category 5 hurricanes we have today, joining forces with the tsunamis.
Wow. And the theological source frames the specific destruction, the loss of ships and sea infrastructure, as a crippling socio-political and economic judgment.
Exactly. In the context of the Book of Revelation, this is aimed at dismantling the Antichrist's global empire.
Right.
The text views it as a direct strike against humanity's idolatry of the earth and the sea as the ultimate sources of wealth and power.
Because by destroying 1/3 of the ships, you sever the vital arteries of global commerce.
You completely stop the distribution of food, fuel, and medical supplies to the followers of that empire.
But I want to push back on the severity of that for a modern society, just for a second.
Okay.
Look, losing 1/3 of our ships would be historically devastating, obviously. But we live in an era of massive inland infrastructure, right?
I do, yeah.
We have airplanes, interstate highways, massive trucking networks, continental freight trains. So if the ocean becomes impassable, wouldn't we just rely on our inland networks? Does losing 1/3 of maritime trade really cause a complete socio-political collapse?
Well, we have to look at the cascading nature of supply chains. It's not just about the cargo vessels sinking out in the middle of the Atlantic.
Okay.
It's about where those ships dock. The tsunamis and the hypercanes mean the ports themselves are pulverized. Ship is useless without a crane to unload it.
Oh, I see.
So if you destroy the coastal ports, you completely sever the supply lines before they ever reach the inland infrastructure.
So the trucks are just sitting empty on the highway because there's nothing to pick up at the coast.
Well, actually, they wouldn't even be on the highway.
Wait, why not?
Remember those magnitude 9 to 11 global earthquakes triggered by the impact?
Oh, right.
Those shock waves are buckling the interstate highways, they're twisting the rail lines, shattering airport runways.
And the hypercanes are probably making flight impossible anyway.
Exactly. The modern global economy operates on just-in-time delivery. The moment the ports, the rails, and the skies break simultaneously, all trade and transportation networks collapse.
So the followers of any global empire, ancient or future, would find their store shelves empty within a matter of days.
Absolutely.
Just look at the objects around your room right now. The electronics, the clothes, the materials building your furniture.
It all came from a port?
Yeah. If the ports vanish tomorrow and the highways buckle, almost every system keeping your daily life functioning stops by next Tuesday.
It's a very fragile system.
Very. The surface of the Earth essentially becomes inaccessible. But according to the sources, the destruction is just as profound beneath the waves. We are talking about the complete collapse of the food chain.
Yeah, the biological toll is where the parallels between the science and the text become incredibly stark.
Because the second trumpet prophecy explicitly states that 1/3 of the sea becomes blood, and 1/3 of all the creatures which were in the sea and had life die.
Which is a horrifying image.
It really is. And the theological source actually offers 3 distinct interpretations for this blood in the water.
Yeah, whenever we look at ancient texts describing catastrophic events, there is always this debate between literal and ecological interpretations.
So let's lay them out. Interpretation 1 suggests a massive release of deadly microorganisms. We know this today as a red tide, where toxic algal blooms literally turn the water a dark, bloody red and suffocate marine life.
Right, which happens even now on a smaller scale.
Exactly. Interpretation 2 is more mechanical. It's actual blood from the sheer physical slaughter of a third of all sea life being crushed by the underwater shock waves and churning sediment.
From the tsunamis and the impact.
Yes. And then interpretation 3 is entirely literal and miraculous. Miraculous blood serving as a clear sign of divine wrath. The source actually draws a direct parallel to the first Egyptian plague in the Book of Exodus, where the Nile was turned to blood to kill the fish and ruin the economy.
But regardless of whether the blood is viewed as miraculous or biological, the ecological outcome is exactly the same.
Dead sea life.
Dead sea life. And the theological source highlights why this matters so much. The sea isn't just a place where fish live, it is the engine of the earth.
How so?
Well, it provides much of the planet's oxygen through the photosynthesis of phytoplankton and algae. It is also the primary engine for our global rainwater cycle through evaporation.
Phytoplankton are basically like the foundational code of the Earth's operating system.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, if you wipe out the phytoplankton, you just shut down the oxygen factory. But I want to know how the geology supports this. The theological text details a localized, massive slaughter in the sea. Does the scientific data show how a single impact actually decimates the global food chain on that scale?
Oh, the Chicxulub data completely supports a global biological collapse.
Really? Just from one rock?
Yeah. The impact didn't just cause a bad day for the dinosaurs in the immediate vicinity. It triggered a mass extinction where roughly 70% of all species on Earth died.
70%.
And the mechanics start with the atmosphere. We talk about that 25 trillion ton plume of molten material, right?
The stuff hotter than the sun.
Right. When that material falls back through the atmosphere, it generates superheated winds moving over 1,000 kilometers per hour, radiating up to 1,800 kilometers outward from the impact zone.
Winds moving 1,000 kilometers an hour at temperatures hot enough to melt lead.
Exactly.
That is practically vaporizing anything biological in its path.
It shredded terrestrial vegetation and incinerated surface animals. Your terrestrial food web is just instantly gutted.
Wow.
Meanwhile, the molten rock raining back down over the entire hemisphere ignites massive wildfires. The geological record suggests 70% of the world's forests burned.
So the ash from those continental fires, combined with the pulverizing shock waves in the ocean, that must dump an unprecedented amount of minerals and toxins into the sea.
Huge amounts.
So the initial firestorm destroys the land, and the fallout from that fire is what actually destroys the oceans. That massive influx of ash and minerals could be the exact mechanism that triggers the global red tide mentioned in the first interpretation.
That's spot on. Toxic algal blooms feed on that sudden influx of nutrients and just choke the surviving marine life.
Which creates a perfect biological synchronization with the second trumpet's description of poison, bloody oceans, and mass aquatic death.
It really does line up perfectly.
But, the fire and the waves are immediate, terrifying killers. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. What shocked me in the NSF data is the invisible killer.
The climate shift.
Exactly. Because the long-term trauma is the catastrophic alteration of the global climate. But there is a bizarre contradiction in the NSF data regarding the timeline here.
Right, the freeze-thaw cycle.
Yeah. First, the planet freezes. Then, the ice caps melt. How do we get a melted greenhouse world out of a freezing nuclear winter? How does that timeline actually work?
It requires understanding the specific geology of where the Chicxulub asteroid hit and how the atmosphere processes different types of vaporized rock over time.
Let's break down the chemistry of this because it is fascinating.
It is.
The asteroid strikes the Yucatan, which is packed with sedimentary gypsum. Gypsum is essentially calcium sulfate.
Right.
When you hit it with an asteroid traveling 20 kilometers a second, you vaporize millions of tons of sulfur, blasting it into the upper atmosphere alongside massive amounts of water vapor.
And phase one of the aftermath is driven entirely by these particulates.
Mm-hmm.
The dust and the sulfate aerosols act like a planetary shield, essentially.
Blocking out the sunlight.
Exactly. Blocking out the sunlight and reflecting solar energy back into space.
This plunges the Earth into a nuclear winter. Without sunlight, photosynthesis stops entirely. The phytoplankton that somehow survived the shock waves and the red tide, well, now they die in the dark.
And the terrestrial plants that didn't burn die from a lack of light.
Global temperatures plummet rapidly, and because you have sulfur and water vapor mixing in the atmosphere, it creates severe, highly concentrated sulfuric acid rain.
So the food chain just collapses from the bottom up. The plants die. The herbivores starve. Then the carnivores starve. It is a freezing, sunless world choked by toxic rain.
But then phase 2 kicks in, and this is where the contradiction happens, because eventually the Earth swings wildly in the opposite direction.
Right, because gravity always wins eventually. Over months and years, the dust and the heavy sulfur aerosols settle out of the atmosphere.
The skies begin to clear.
They do.
Yeah.
But the atmosphere they leave behind has been fundamentally altered.
And this is where the carbonate rock comes into play, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. The Yucatan impact site wasn't just gypsum. It also contained massive deposits of carbonate rock.
Okay.
Vaporizing carbonate rock releases staggering amounts of carbon dioxide. Add to that the CO2 released from burning 70% of the world's forests.
Oh, wow. So the blanket of reflective dust falls away, and it is replaced by a thick blanket of greenhouse gas.
Exactly. Once the sun finally penetrates the atmosphere again, all that incoming solar radiation hits the Earth, turns into heat, and gets trapped by the carbon dioxide.
The heat has nowhere to go.
Nowhere. The Earth violently pendulums from a deep freeze into a devastating post-impact hothouse. The global temperatures spike so high that the polar ice caps ultimately melt.
It is a horrific 1-2 punch. The dust freezes whatever survives the fire, and the greenhouse gas cooks whatever survives the ice.
It's incredibly thorough.
It really is. And this perfectly mirrors the duality of the destruction we see in both sources. The second trumpet targets the Earth, the sea, and the commerce of the Antichrist Empire, ensuring that the planet's entire operating system is fundamentally rewritten and brought to its knees.
When you look at the mechanics of destruction, they really align across millennia of geological observation and ancient theological texts.
We're looking at a scenario where a mountain-sized rock striking the ocean is far more than a localized explosion.
It's a system failure.
Exactly. By synthesizing the NSF data of Chicxulub with the analysis of Revelation, we see a synchronized, terrifying picture. We have 1.5-kilometer tsunamis wiping out coastal ports and global supply chains.
We have hypercanes and magnitude 11 earthquakes tearing apart inland infrastructure, grounding all air and rail transport.
We see the foundational food chain collapsing in a sea of red tide fueled by ash and acid rain. And finally, a global nuclear winter followed by a suffocating greenhouse hothouse.
It forces a profound realization of our own vulnerability, I think.
Yeah.
The theological text frames this catastrophe as a divine judgment on humanity's absolute reliance on the earth and sea for power and survival. Scientifically, we see exactly why that reliance is our greatest structural weak point.
It's a sobering reminder for you, listening right now, just how delicate the invisible systems you rely on really are. That seafood dinner we talked about, the package you ordered online, the phytoplankton quietly manufacturing the oxygen you are breathing right now.
The shipping lanes bringing fuel to your city.
The stable climate that allows us to grow wheat and corn. All of it, every single piece of modern civilization, hinges entirely on the sky remaining quiet.
We build our cities and our economies, assuming the ground beneath us is solid and the sky above us is empty. The geologic record and the prophetic text both exist to remind us that they are neither.
At the start of this deep dive, we asked you to picture holding a modern scientific readout in one hand and an ancient apocalyptic text in the other. It turns out, whether you are relying on the astrophysics and atmospheric chemistry of a modern drilling expedition or the ancient, vivid words of a visionary seeing a mountain of fire, they both lead you to the exact same blazing, chaotic edge of the ocean. They both tell the story of a world that is incredibly fragile and a timeline that can be rewritten in an instant. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep exploring those weird connections, and we will see you next time.
Nye.